What transpired following the unexpected death of Dan Blocker, the adored Bonanza star? His fans will always remember him as the charming Hoss Cartwright, but off camera, he left behind a bereaved family, a secret money, and a deserted estate. His co-stars, his wife, and their 4 children, one of whom discreetly entered the Hollywood industry, were all shocked. Where does that leave the shocking reality of his wealth or the beach that bears his name? Stay tuned, because the truth behind Dan Blocker's story is far more shocking and tragic than you would expect. Step back in time with me to December 10, 1928, in the small hamlet of Dalhart, Texas. Life was peaceful and uncomplicated. Okay, things were pretty loud when Dan was born. Why? His massive 14-pound birth weight made him the biggest baby ever born in Bowie County. Dan stomped, not crawled, the locals said. Dan didn't exactly grow up in a Hollywood movie. The average people who tried to weather the Great Depression were his parents, Mary Arizona and Aura Shawak Blocker. After losing everything in the economic collapse, Shawak opened a tiny grocery business to make ends meet. Now things start to become interesting. Because of his large frame, Dan wasn't exactly suited for the delicate tasks that he did for a majority of his childhood, stocking shelves and carrying groceries. Given that Dan was more likely to topple cans than stack them, his dad would make light of the fact that he might have to hire someone to remove Dan from the situation. But hey, that very issue would propel him to stardom in due time. To get to the point where Dan enrolled at the Texas Military Institute at the age of 13, we need to go ahead a little. Already an enormous young man, he earned a position on the football team's linebacker unit. He intended to become an English teacher after graduating from Sul Ross State University, and football, sure enough, covered the cost of his education there. Actually, the future TV cowboy's initial goal was to have a peaceful life as a paper grader. The theater department, however, unexpectedly required a strong individual to lug about the hefty stage equipment one day. Besides Dan, anyone else? And now for the catch. He was more than simply a backstage movers. The play cast him. But you know what? There was love for the great man. Still without a partner, but on stage all the same. The applause, the roar, the limelight. In a flash, instead of footballs, he switched to footlights. He left English for acting and hasn't returned. Another unexpected turn of events occurred after graduation, the Korean War. Dan heeded the call of duty and returned as a distinguished soldier, having served with honor. In fact, he was awarded the Purple Heart. Although he displayed great resiliency on the battlefield, a major softening of his heart was imminent. Why? Reason being, he wed Dolphia Parker, his soulmate, immediately following the war. Who is Dolphia, you may be asking? She wasn't exactly a Hollywood A-lister. Dan met Dolphia, an Oklahoma native who was a strong-willed, independent young woman who worked in the theater's backstage department. Yes, Dan was being a goofball when they first met. He had to be told to stop by Dolphia since he was making a nuisance of himself during rehearsal. After Dan's marriage, he felt he had everything under control. In addition to teaching high school students in Texas and New Mexico English and drama, he returned to school to earn a master's degree in dramatic arts. Here, though, destiny prodded him once more. As they continued west, the family got closer and closer to the Golden State. Was he trying to get famous? Not at all. All he wanted was a secure job and a doctorate in acting. However, Dan began trying out for jobs on television in order to pay the bills. At the time, Dan was the ideal Western hero. He had guest appearances on popular 1950s series such as Maverick, The Rifleman, and Gunsmoke. He had not yet achieved stardom, but he was rapidly approaching it. Next thing you know, he got a recurring part on Cimarron City in 1958. The show may not have run for very long, but the credits should not be rolled just yet. The door to a much larger opportunity was opened by that little gig. Producer David Dortort was casting for the part of Eric Hayes Cartwright, son of the middle Cartwright, for his new series Bonanza. In terms of heart, it was invaluable, but it wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Suddenly, Dan became Hayes after acing the audition. Hoss wasn't your average TV cowboy, believe me when I say that. The show's heart and soul belonged to him. However, the majority of individuals are unaware of this. Dan embodied the persona. He maintained the same kind, welcoming demeanor when he wasn't on film. Somewhat of a softy beneath his lofty stature. Children adored him. The adults had faith in him. Plus, Bonanza erupted onto television screens in 1959 and ran for 13 consecutive seasons. The audience went wild. There was more to the act than just saloon fights. Racism, family, and loyalty were among of the serious topics covered. What about Dan? In the middle of it all, he made sure every scenario hit close to home. However, Dan remained true to himself despite his achievements. So they could be closer, he relocated his parents to California. He never lost his footing, being the modest soul who had worked his way up from stocking shelves at his dad's grocery business. Come Blow Your Horn and Lady in Cement were films in which Dan co-starred with Frank Sinatra, but he never betrayed Bonanza. Dan wasn't occupied solely with herding cattle on television though. He and Dolphia started a family and brought up 4 kids, David and Dirk, 2 boys, and twin daughters Deborah and Dana. There was a lot of love, laughter, and, yes, mayhem in their home. Being a dad was something Dan loved doing, even though it occasionally required him to ditch his cowboy hat in favor of a diaper bag. Even though Dan was a Hollywood mogul, he made sure his kids had a normal, everyday upbringing. As they grew older, he hoped they wouldn't see celebrity as something ordinary. That's why, barely 20 miles from Paramount Studios, the location of Bonanza in Northridge, California, a modest 4-bedroom home, was chosen by the Blocker family despite his burgeoning star power. Just a simple house with 3 bathrooms and a pool, ideal for a family of 4 with active children. Although Dan did drive a Corvette Stingray, Dolphia, she continued to drive a dependable 1963 Cadillac, demonstrating that they were unattached to the glitter of Hollywood. Concerning the home front, Dan's enormous 260-pound physique frequently provided comedic material for the mundane tasks of parenting. His children would chortle in amusement when he would test their electric racetrack set or playfully battle with them in the backyard. He was the type of father like that, always there, full of energy, and more than willing to play on the floor with his children. Being famous, though, wasn't always a bed of roses. Even a casual outing to get ice cream with the kids could spontaneously evolve into a meet and greet with fans. Dan was followed everywhere he went by throngs of fans, both young and old. Even while he had a soft spot for his admirers, he had to confess that the constant pinning down by total strangers wasn't his favorite aspect of performing. He merely desired for his children to enjoy a typical childhood, but he was finding that this was becoming increasingly elusive. We need to go back a little if you want to know how Dan's acting bug bit so deeply. Dan originally intended to have a very different life before he wore all those cowboy boots and hats. In Dan's junior year of college, he had completely embraced the stage, all because Dolphia had encouraged him to do so. He dove headfirst into theater productions after changing his degree to speech. Participating in productions with the Mask and Slippers Drama Club, he portrayed a terrible husband opposite Dolphia Rubson in Noel Coward's Fumed Oak, among others. On stage, they hardly had to put any effort into portraying a couple that was squabbling, but off stage, they were secretly falling in love. Dan earned a bachelor's degree in speech in 1950 from Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, Texas. This is where the majority of men would go for the cash, isn't it? Especially if the opportunity to play professional football comes your way. Except for Dan. Not at all. He rejected the gridiron in favor of the stage, demonstrating early on that he was unmotivated by the pursuit of stardom and wealth. He merely desired to pursue what accelerated his heart rate. Taking a chance after finishing college, he and his friend Dennis Reed traveled east to become part of the summer stock theater circuit. Dan landed a position in a Broadway production of King Lear, and they began their journey in Boston's Brattle Hall Theater. Uncle Sam called right when the action was about to heat up, adding another twist to the tale. The United States military drafted Dan in 1950. He put his acting aspirations on hold to serve in the Army. Though he endured 4 arduous months in Camp Polk in Louisiana, he was still unable to resist the stage, even while dressed in uniform. While juggling military drills with rehearsals, he leapt into an Army production of Macbeth. The enjoyment, however, was short-lived. Immediately following his training, Dan was deployed to Japan and subsequently plunged into the frigid Korean War trenches. This wasn't a casual engagement either. Dan and his team had a grueling 10 hours encircled on Hill 255 by enemy soldiers on Christmas Eve, 1951. Extreme fatigue, shooting, and frigid weather befell him.